Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce our friend, Dr. Alan Berger. We're continuing our series of workshops on emotional sobriety. Dr. Berger speaks to our group on the first Monday of every single month during this year, 2022. Tonight, it is the 10th part of his discussion of how we can apply the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety to our recovery to achieve growth in our programs. Dr. Berger brings us a wealth of knowledge and experience every month in his presentations, and they're always followed by that Q&A discussion. So here we go. Alan will be speaking tonight on insight number 9 from his book. That 9th essential insight is one I need to pay attention to, breaking the bonds of perfectionism. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alan. Can't wait.
Well,
Can't wait,
yes.
I think.
Well, thank you, Susie, and hello, everyone. Susie, I do want to say at the beginning of this that I do need to leave at 2:45 my time. I've got a sick little girl at home that I've got to go check on. So she's been running a fever for the last day and a half, and I do need to check out at that time instead of at usually 10 till the hour. So what we're going to be diving into is breaking the bonds of perfectionism. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, how does this relate to emotional sobriety? Well, I'm glad you're asking that question because that's what I'm going to address today. So let me share my screen with you and we'll dive right into this. So what we're going to be talking about today is this is the chapter in 12 Essential Insights. That's insight number 9. And in the book, what I did is I tried to capture as much as possible a process that leads to the practice of emotional sobriety. We never attain emotional sobriety completely. Think of it more as a destination that you reach sometimes, like you go on vacation there, and then you leave and you come back and you leave and you come back, and we do that for the rest of our lives. So it's a practice on how to get there. And this insight, I think, is a very important part of the practice. So emotional sobriety, as you've heard me say before, is a practice that transforms an I'm okay if attitude or consciousness into an I'm okay even if consciousness. This creates what Bill Wilson called a true spirit of independence. Now, the I'm okay if consciousness is a very, very conditional consciousness, and it is dependent on our environment supporting us in the way that we think we need to be supported to be okay. This is what creates our emotional dependence, is our need for environmental support to be okay. That creates an incredible emotional dependency that turns each and every one of us into a control freak, wanting things to go our way, becoming master manipulators of trying to get things our way, and not knowing what to do when life does not conform to our expectations. More specifically for today, we can think of emotional sobriety as a practice that transcends a consciousness that demands absolute thinking. This absolute thinking is a very rigid way of thinking, a very black and white way, and a thinking that is intolerant of mistakes. Things must be this way for me to be okay. And emotional sobriety helps us move towards a consciousness that is less absolute, meaning less black and white, more flexible, and more tolerant of mistakes. This creates a consciousness of emotional freedom. Now, I will refer to this idea about our consciousness being differentiated or undifferentiated. And when we come into this world, our consciousness is incredibly undifferentiated. Depending on the level of differentiation that your parents have achieved, that will determine the extent to which your consciousness becomes differentiated before you leave your family. Now, here in the United States, that's not very good news. The level of differentiation across the board in the United States is below 50. So if you imagine differentiation being on a scale of 0 to 100, with a person being completely differentiated and 0 being a person being completely undifferentiated, 50 is not a good thing. And I think we're at a 50 in terms of the best, under the best circumstances. I think most of the time our society here is operating about 40. There's a complete intolerance of differences. We take things personally. Addiction is rampant in the States. It's one of the most serious issues that we face in terms of health problems. It's up there with cancer and cardiovascular illness. I mean, and it's all because of our undifferentiated consciousness. And you'll understand more and more of that. But just think of that, an undifferentiated consciousness is very rigid. It's very black and white. Things must be a certain way for us to be okay. That's what an undifferentiated consciousness does. The more differentiated I become, the less I take things personally. The more I'm able to respect differences and tolerate differences, the less I need things to go my way. The more flexible I can be in my response to situations. When my consciousness is undifferentiated, I have very little flexibility, and the demand that things have to be a certain way for me to be okay is very high. When my consciousness is differentiated, I am able to act for myself without impinging on the rights of others. When my consciousness is undifferentiated, then my mood, my well-being depends on what's going on around me, not on what I'm doing, but what everybody else is doing or what's happening in the society around me. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor in terms of what we're talking about here. Now, in order to transcend our perfectionism, we must become aware of how our behavior is influenced by what Bill called his perfectionistic demands and specifications. And then when we become aware of it, is to own the outrageous expectations we have of ourselves, we have of others, and we have of life. That's the way to get out. That's the way that we start to unhook ourselves from our perfectionism, is to own how outrageous each and every one of us is. Just the idea that we can be perfect is incredibly outrageous and arrogant. It's unbelievable that we even have thoughts like this. But as you're going to see, it makes sense in terms of where we come from.
Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression.
So this was Bill's great insight into what was going on that was causing him so much depression. He realized that his emotional mood, his emotional status was determined by things going the way that he wanted them to go. And when they didn't, his response was to fight for them, to try to control the people, places, or things surrounding him. And when they did not cooperate, when they did not do what he wanted them to do, he got depressed. He felt defeated. He felt deflated. He felt discouraged. He felt disappointed. And he did not know what to do. Now, we're going to be focusing today on these perfectionist dreams and specifications, right? I called him earlier perfectionist demands and specifications, because his dreams were really demands. Now, there's a difference between us making a request for something and demanding it. If I make a request, say, hey, Susie, would you do this for me? She has a right to say no. If I make a demand, then when Susie says no, I shame her into thinking that she was wrong for saying no. I try to make her feel bad about it. And if she's not differentiated, she'd buy it, right? If she was differentiated, she'd say, well, Alan, quit trying to manipulate me. I just said no, and I'd like you to respect it. And then the matter would be over, right? But you got to be pretty mature to be able to handle things that way.
There wasn't a chance of making the outgoing love of St. Francis a workable and joyous way of life until these fatal and almost absolute dependencies were cut away. Because I had over the years undergone a little spiritual development, the absolute quality of these frightful dependencies had never before been so starkly revealed.
So these were two passages from Bill Wilson's letter on emotional sobriety, The Next Frontier, that were published in the 1958 Grapevine. If you have not read this letter in its entirety, I would really encourage you to do so, is to print it out, keep it around, because it's just chock full of insights and information about emotional sobriety. And a lot of my work, springs from his discussion, especially my first book, 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone. So get a hold of that letter. It's really insightful. So we realized we have to cut him away.
Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I found I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, indeed upon any act or circumstance whatsoever. Then could I be free to love as Francis did. Emotional and instinctual satisfactions I saw were really the extra dividends of having love, offering love, and expressing love appropriate to each relation of life.
So, as Bill said in the passages before this, he had to cut off his faulty emotional dependencies. He called them fatal emotional dependencies because they can really take you down a very, very, very dark place, into a very dark place if you let them. Many, many homicides are created out of this emotional dependency. People can't let go of people and can't, surrender to the fact that they've lost this person. They demand that the person love them. And if they're not going to love them, then they kill them. I mean, that's how crazy this can, get. Now, he said he had to exert every ounce of will, and you do. You really have to make a big commitment to clean this stuff up. He had will and action, because commitment without action is an empty promise. He says to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies, which in today's talk is based on examining our perfectionistic dreams and demands and specifications. That's what this emotional dependency does, is it generates an idea of how things are supposed to be. He says we have to cut these off, these faulty emotional dependencies, meaning we have to unhook people from our perfectionist dreams and specifications. And we have to also examine the kind of relationship we have with our mutual help, self-help group, right? Meaning, am I looking to AA to now give me what I need to be giving myself? See, Bill's insight into this was incredible, because the program is not to replace one unhealthy dependence with another dependency. The program is to grow you to stand on your own 2 feet and to learn how to take care of yourself, to help you grow up, to help you unhook people and places and things from your demands so that you can learn how to cope with reality as it is. See, we know from the mental health point of view is that the more aligned you are with reality, the better you're going to be able to cope with it. In fact, that's one of the things I was trained to assess, is a person's what we call reality testing. Were they grounded in reality, or they were living with a bunch of myths? Well, the truth is a lot of us are living with a lot of mythology, a lot of fantasies about how things are supposed to be that have nothing to do with the way things really are. See, once we start to release these things, then we can really be free to love. Then we can have a relationship with reality and people as it is, not as we demand it to be. And then we can love unconditionally. We can have love, offer love, and express love appropriate to each relation of life, which also means that I'm not going to feel the same way about everyone. There's room for me to have closer relationships with some people than others. You know, Robert Bly, a brilliant American poet, wrote a book called The Sibling Society. There's so much pressure to treat everybody as the same. And not everybody is going to have the same importance to you. There's going to be some people you get closer to than others. And that's okay. That's just who we are.
Plainly, I could not avail myself to God's love until I was able to offer it back to him by loving others as he would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependencies meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me. While those words absolute dependence may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped to trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others, regardless of the return to me. Of course, I haven't offered you a really new idea, only a gimmick that has started to unhook several of my own hexes at depth. Nowadays, my brain no longer races compulsively in either elation, grandiosity, or depression. I've been given a quiet place in bright sunshine.
See, when you get to this state of mind, when you can practice emotional sobriety and start achieving, some degree of it, then the problem is never the problem. The problem, it comes in for us with how we're coping with the issue. And it really helps us grow ourselves up by having that kind of an attitude. Now, Ernie Larson wrote a lot about stage 1 and stage 2 recovery. And stage 2 recovery, I think you can think of it as synonymous with, or at least that stage 2 recovery is contingent upon establishing emotional sobriety. This is what he says. Stage 2 recovery is about dealing with the mountain of living, is what stage 2 recovery is all about. It's about getting on with life by facing those patterns and habits and attitudes that control your life. Today, we're going to be looking at perfectionism. How does that habit and pattern in your thought and attitude control your life, in which perhaps for the first time in your life, you're clear-headed enough, sober enough, or emotionally sound enough to face? You see, we have to face who we're not if we're going to become who we can be. And I say this all the time, only the best in you can see the worst in you. Only the best in you. And what you're going to see today is perfectionism is not something to be proud of. It's something that is incredibly destructive in our lives. So here's essential insight number 9, breaking the bonds of perfectionism. All right. This is the challenge that we have if we're going to establish any kind of emotional sobriety. So I like this image because this image says is that we all buy into this idea that I have to be someone I'm not to be okay. See, that's the persona, right? That we all put on. It's a mask. And behind that mask is who we really are. I mean, I love, The Wizard of Oz, right? Because you see there's that one scene when Dorothy pulls back the curtain and the wizard is sitting there behind this big controlling thing and trying to manage this impression of how the all-powerful and knowing Oz, right? Well, that's what each and every one of us does in our own way. And we are behind that mask. And we think, God, if anybody really sees who we are, they could never love us. They could never accept us. That we think we have to be this image, this idea we have of who we think we should be to be okay. You see, each and every one of us create that. But this is what Dr. Karen Horney said, and she's so right on with this. She says the fostering of the phony self. Think about that as your false self. Each and every one of you, by the way, are phonies that are sitting in this room with me. I am too. I've been a phony my whole life, trying to think I've got to be someone else than I am to be okay. The fostering of the phony self is always at the expense of the real self. And we pay a terrible price because you cannot make your life work when you're rejecting who you are. No matter what you try to do, no matter what tricks you try to play, when you abandon yourself, there is no foundation for your life. Now you have to play games. Now you have to act like you're someone you're not, and it's just not going to work. And that's what we do. We come up with this idea, this idealized self of how we're supposed to be, and we're like bonsai masters. We clip certain of our branches if they don't fit with who we think we should be. We emphasize and we feed and water and encourage the growth of other parts of us at the expense of all of us. So some parts of us, we revel in, we're proud of, I call it false pride, by the way, that we're this way. And the parts of us that don't fit with this idealized image of who we think we should be, we reject and we hate ourselves for them. And if somebody sees them, we're humiliated. Oh my God, somebody might see who I really am and that I'm not this thing that I think I should be. This creates a mess. I look at this and I feel sad right now. This is what we do to ourselves. This is how we try to adapt to make sense of our world. This is how we try to ensure our existence by manipulating ourselves into some image of who we think we should be to be loved and accepted. And see, all of this grows out of this basic anxiety that we're not going to be loved and accepted. This is how Fritz Perls talks about it. He says the critical point during our development, both collectively as a society and individually, is the ability to differentiate between self-actualization and the actualization of a concept. The ability to differentiate. Do you know how to differentiate between where you are really actualizing who you are versus where you're trying to live up to a concept? Well, there's a way to know the difference. If you're trying to live up to a concept, you are trying to do the impossible. Bill called it an impossible way of life. When you actualize yourself, now you're emphasizing what's possible. So if you are frustrated, life is not working, you can rest assured that underneath it is you trying to actualize a concept of who you should be. Fritz says it another way. He says many people dedicate their lives to actualizing a concept of what they should be like. By the way, that's how you can tell if you're actualizing a concept. You will start out with I should, I'm supposed to, they should, they're supposed to. That's how you know if it's an idealized self. Many people dedicate their lives to actualize a concept of what they should be like rather than to actualize themselves. This is, again, the curse of the ideal, the curse that you should not be what you are. Now listen to that, the curse that you should not be what you are. I hope you can feel the pain of that when I say it, because that's what you've done to yourself, just like I have. It's terribly sad. It's terribly tragic that this is what we do to ourselves. And yet we think we're doing ourselves a favor. You know, talk about gaslighting. My God, we've gaslit ourselves our whole lives with this nonsense. This is Dr. Karen Horney again. She goes, at the core of this alienation from the actual self. So remember, as soon as you shifted from trying to actualize who you were, self-actualization, to actualizing a concept, you've now alienated yourself from who you are. That's what she's talking about there. At the core of this alienation from the actual self is the loss of the feeling of being an active, determining force in our own lives. So as soon as I say I should be like this, I'm supposed to be like this, this is my goal, this is who I'm going to be, that takes over. Now your life is run by what she called the tyranny of shoulds. You should all over yourself. I should be like this. I should be like that. You measure everything you do according to these standards. And these standards, these rules, these unenforceable rules, these expectations, they are not based on who you are as a person. They're based on this idealized concept. That idealized concept is an absolute concept. This is the origins of perfectionism. I must be this way to be okay. So as soon as you've adopted this idealized image of yourself, your perfectionism now was established. It was going to run your life because now everything was going to be measured in terms of, am I living up to this criteria or not? And it was black and white. You either were or you weren't. There wasn't any becoming anything. You either made it or you didn't make it. This is one of the consequences that low self-esteem, the rejection of ourselves, right? Low self-esteem is feeling I'm worthy of love and acceptance and that I'm able to deal with life. Low self-esteem means that to an extreme extent, we base our own experience of ourself on what we think others think about us. We evaluate ourselves by how we think other people will see us and think about us. Will they accept me? Will they love me? Will they like me? Will I belong? Can I be a part of? Will I be rejected? So Dr. Horney goes on to say that the integrity of a person is impaired. Integrity, think of it as wholeness, right? Is that when you reject yourself, you can't have integrity. Your integrity is compromised. This is the original sin, if you will, is once you've compromised your integrity, your integrity of you as a person is impaired because of this alienation from your true self. She goes, the unavoidable unconscious pretenses. I must be this way to be okay. The also unavoidable unconscious compromises due to unsolved problems is that I'm going to compromise myself. I'm not going to be able to see when I'm incongruent. I'm going to compromise my awareness. I'm going to have selective inattention, meaning I'm only going to see what I want to see about myself, and I'm not going to look at the other things that don't fit the image of who I am. The self-contempt, because as soon as I act in any way that is incongruent with who I should be, I'm going to hate myself for it. It's going to generate so much anxiety and so much self-hate, and I'm going to punish myself to try to put myself back in line with who I should be. So when I'm the way I think I should be, I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to think what a wonderful person I am. And as soon as I act out of line, I'm going to hate myself. I'm going to say good boy when you're being the boy that you should be. And I'm going to say bad boy when I'm not living up to these ideals. Well, my God, I'm one of Pavlov's dogs. I mean, I'm reinforcing myself and with either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. She goes, all these forces lead to, and pay attention to this, a diminished capacity for being sincere with oneself. A diminished capacity, meaning you don't know how to take care of yourself. You're not going to be able to show up and support yourself. You're not going to be able to champion yourself. You're not going to be able to stand up for yourself and not impinge on the rights of others because there's no self in you. You've given that up. Now people have to buy and accept the self you want them to believe that you are. That's the demand. That's the perfectionistic dream and specification that Bill Wilson was talking about. And each and every one of us does this. So perfection is not doing things perfectly. It is expecting ourselves to do things perfectly, to do things according to the specifications of the idealized self. It is a relentless drive towards an unrealistic, inhuman, and unattainable goal. A tree cannot be a rock. An elephant can't be a giraffe. A dog cannot be a cat. You cannot be someone that you're not. In responding to the should demands, this is Fritz Perls again, the co-founder of Gestalt therapy, we play roles not supported by our genuine needs. Because you see, with the idealized self, it says certain needs you have are acceptable and other needs are not. It's okay for you to be this way, but it's not okay for you to be that way. So if you have a feeling that's outside of what's okay, you can't support yourself for it. You can't support yourself to fulfill that desire. You're going to reject it. You're going to erase yourself. So we become both phony and phobic. We shy away from seeing our limitations, and we play roles unsupported by our potential. We construct an imaginary ideal of how we should be and not how we actually are. We cannot support ourselves. And that's why when we're confronted with one of these things, that we can't really stand for ourselves. When you're confronted with one of these things, what you're going to do is stand against other people instead of standing for yourself. He goes on to say, by turning his perfectionistic demands toward himself, the neurotic tears himself to pieces in order to live up to his unrealistic ideal. So this is one of the ways that you can tell to what degree have you been now bought into your idealized self, is the amount of conflict you have. If you are in a lot of internal conflict and you're constantly struggling with being able to make a decision and stand behind it and be wholehearted about things, it's because you are split inside. Now, the only person that is not split inside is a person who's given up this whole deal and they've taken what we call the resigned attitude, right? They've thrown in the towel. They've said, forget it, I'll never make this work, so I'm not going to want anything or need anything. That person doesn't feel conflict. They feel nothing. They feel empty inside, right? Because they can't want anything or else they're going to feel these conflicts. He goes, though perfection is often labeled an ideal, we talk about the perfect performance for a gymnast or one of the Olympic skaters, those kinds of things. It is actually a cheap curse which punishes and tortures both the self and others for not living up to an impossible goal. Now, you've heard me say this before, is we don't treat others the way that we'd like them to treat us. We treat others the way we treat ourselves. That's the real golden rule. So you're going to take these perfectionistic demands and requirements that you have of yourself, and you're going to go ahead and project them on other people. You cannot help but do that. It's how we're wired. So Fritz goes on to say, the concept of perfection is such an ideal. In responding, the individual develops a phony facade to impress others what a good boy he is. Demands for perfection limit his ability to function within himself. Now, what does that mean? It means that when you are a healthy individual, that you operate from what we call the psychological and biological imperative. You have a desire, you mobilize yourself to fulfill that desire, and once you've fulfilled it, you're calm. You're resolved. Now you're ready for what's next. Sometimes when we have a desire and now we go to fulfill it, we might run into conflict. The environment is not cooperating in the way we want, our partner is not. So now we introduce struggle. If we meet that struggle in a good way, it's going to lead to resolution. It's going to lead to the calmness again. If that struggle if we cannot find a path to resolution, to getting our need met, then what happens is we have a desire, we go to mobilize ourselves to fulfill it, there's struggle, The struggle's not going anywhere. It's not going to happen. And now we experience our disappointment and we embrace our grief. And if we embrace our grief in the right way, we get to a resolution because we accept what is. That's that psychological imperative. You are wired to go to respond to any situation along those lines. If you're sitting here and your bladder is filling with urine, you're going to start to think about going that you're going to need to urinate, and you're going to continue to think about it until you get up and go to the bathroom and void that urine from your bladder. Once you're done with that, then you're not going to be thinking about urinating anymore. Same thing if you're hungry. Same thing if you're lonely. You're going to reach out to someone, try to make contact with that person in a way to create that communion that you're looking for, that connection. So that's what we mean about that these demands for perfection limit the individual's ability to function within himself. Because if I lay all kinds of expectations on how things should be, that when I go ahead, first of all, only certain desires are acceptable and others aren't. So I've already cut myself off at my legs. But then when I have a desire to get fulfilled, it means that you have to behave a certain way. And now I'm stuck in that whole thing. If you don't behave that way, I get mad, upset with you. How dare you do that? You're not a good friend. What kind of a friend are you? And I blame you for what's going on instead of stepping back and taking stock in myself. And so the demands for perfection limit the individual's ability to function within himself in the therapeutic situation, meaning to be able to come in there and be authentic and real in the situation. They're going to limit your ability to function in your recovery, in your marriage, as well in any other social situations. So Bill was so right on when he said it's a spiritual axiom that every time we're disturbed, no matter the cause, there's something wrong with us. This is what's wrong with us. If you want to know what it is, it's these perfectionist dreams, demands, and specifications that you have about how you think things are supposed to be. Oftentimes, these are unconscious. You may be aware of some of them, but most of these are going to exist outside of your awareness. And that's why it's so important to learn to unpack your disturbance. A big, big part of the practice of emotional sobriety is learning to figure out what's really going on with you when you're upset. Big clue is it's not what the other person's doing. It's what it means to you. That's the issue here. Now, the top dog is the should side. It's the perfectionist side. So we usually take for granted the top dog is right. In many cases, the top dog makes impossible perfectionistic demands. You should be like this to be okay. You shouldn't make any mistakes. If you make a mistake, you are a mistake. That's what the top dog tells you. So if you are cursed with perfectionism, you're sunk. Thanks, Fritz. You're sunk. The ideal is a yardstick which always gives you the opportunity to browbeat yourself, to berate yourself and others. Since the ideal is an impossibility, you can never live up to it. The perfectionist is not in love with his wife. He is in love with his ideal. You guys got to hear that. You're not in love with the person you think you are. You're in love with your ideal. And he demands from his wife that she should fit in with his, Procrustes bed of his expectations. That's Greek mythology. And he blames her if she does not fit. So when someone doesn't live up to our expectations, if we don't have any humility, we're going to judge them ruthlessly about how they're lacking and what a terrible person they are because they don't meet our needs. So how do we deal with all this mess? Well, look, thank God our program gives us some immunity, a vaccination, if you will, for our perfectionism. Bill said it very clearly. This is a program that not of spiritual perfection, but of spiritual progress. We strive for progress, not perfection. This is where our humility comes in. Dr. Kempler, my mentor, said, if you strive for perfection, Never fool yourself into thinking that you can achieve it. That's a nice alternative as well. But it's all based on you giving up these ideas on what's supposed to happen, what should happen, who you should be, who you're supposed to be, who others should be, who others are supposed to be, and letting them go. See, the immunity for perfection is letting go. Living and let live is what we see in the rooms all the time. Live and let live. That's the little placard that's on the walls of one of, I think, a great little idiom that we have to remind ourselves of this. Now, remember that Bill Wilson said it, that if you practice the 12 steps in your daily life, that we and those among us, about us, I think he said, will find emotional sobriety. The 12 steps are the path to learning the practice of this. If you want to learn more about that, tune in on Thursday nights or go back to the archives of that Thursday night meeting that's now over 2 years old. We've archived the first 30 minutes of my discussion of Herb Kagan and Tom Rutledge and Roger Andes. And the first, set of videos in there are about how the 12 steps help achieve emotional sobriety. Then I talk at length about differentiation and the consciousness of differentiation. And now we're talking about how the 12 steps increase what we call an authentic self-esteem that's based on humility, and how they help you achieve that so that you can achieve emotional sobriety. So that's on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock. I'm sure it's going to be posted in the chat. And then I hope somebody can also post the link to the videos, the video archive library. It's quite an extensive library now. God, there's probably over 80 videos there. So now this is what Dr. Karen Horney said. The aim of therapy, and I think it's the aim of recovery as well, is to help a person abandon his drive to actualize the idealized self and move towards self-realization. That's what the steps do. They're incredibly helpful in terms of helping us discover who we are and to discover new possibilities in our life. So this is what I was talking about before. The ordinary state of affairs for a normal person is to move fluidly from a state of need arousal to need satisfaction, from tension to relaxation, from figural attention to homogenized interest or disinterest. Moreover, the well-functioning person lives comfortably in the changing flow of his experience. So that's what we mean about flexibility, is to be able to flow with the moment. That's what we're looking for. But if you're a perfectionist, you can't, because you're always putting demands on that moment, demands on how it should be, how it should look, how you should feel, instead of learning to flow with what is. All right, let's see what's next here. I don't need to talk about that. And I talked about that. Now on Thursdays, there's also this emotional study group. Susie can ask more questions about that. She's been involved in this group for a while. You get, for $12.99 a month, you get access to all my talks on emotional sobriety and recovery and stuff, as well as many of Herb's. And plus, once a month, I'm there to have an intimate workshop with people. There's about 20 people that show up, right, Susie? Right around 20, the most 30. So it's an ideal situation to meet with me. If you can't afford my outrageous fee for individual therapy, then this is a great alternative. So please join us in that. And this is how you can contact me if you've got any direct questions. So I'll leave that up for a minute for you to take a screenshot of that if you want, or a picture. And now we can open it up and have a discussion for about the next 20 minutes or so.